Hi everyone, I'm Miranda and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I wanted to share some of my very favourite poetry anthologies with you all. I absolutely adore poetry and I have so many poetry books. A lot of them are behind me on my shelves right here. These are all poetry and I have more than this. So poetry is a real passion of mine. But what I wanted to share in particular with you all today are some poetry anthologies I have that are poem a day anthologies. So they share a poem for every day of the year. And I've been reading these for many years, but I've been inspired recently to really get back into my habit of trying to read poetry every day. I was talking to an author on my podcast, Tea and Tattle, and she shared that part of her morning routine is to read and write poetry every day. That interview was with Irena Sinakoji. I'll put a link in the description box down below if you'd like to have a listen. But just that small part of our conversation really inspired me. And so I thought today I would share some of the poem a day anthologies that I have with you all and maybe inspire you too to read a little bit more poetry. So the first ones I'm going to share with you are some of the first I ever bought myself and started reading when I was a young student in London. This one is called Poem for the Day, number 1, because there are 2, and it has a foreword by Wendy Cope. I really love this one. It's still an anthology that I return to often. It seemed very special at the time because I don't think there were as many anthologies like this when I first bought this in the early 2000s. It still is a favourite of mine because, I don't know if you can see, but it shares other significant literary facts about each day of the year at the top. And then at the bottom, there's quite a lot on either the poet or the meaning behind the poem, which I really enjoy too. I really like anthologies that don't just share a poem, they actually share a bit more information about the poem or about that particular date in the year as well. This one does both, as does the sequel, Poem for the Day too. So I really, really enjoy that. I'm just going to look up today's date. So the poem for today, January 26th, is Australia by Bernard O'Dowd. I'm not going to read it aloud, but I thought it'd be fun to see in each one what poem it is. And then in this one, it is Peace by Amy Whiting. So these do also have quite a good range of both modern poets and classic poets that are represented in these anthologies, which I think is really great as well. Okay, so as it's just been Burns Night, I also thought it was appropriate to share this poetry anthology, which is A Year of Scottish Poems. Scotland is such a romantic landscape to me that I think it fits so well with the idea of reading more poetry, both about Scotland and by Scottish poets. And this is a real celebration of Scotland and of poetry. Again, it has a wide selection of modern poets as well as more classic poets. They're really well chosen. This one shares only the poems. There isn't any kind of additional facts or things like that. Today's poem is Fragment 1 by Kathleen Jamie. So you can see in the sort of poem a day type anthologies too, they tend to be quite short poems. This is just sort of real bite-sized literature, but I think it's such a fun way to just open up your creative mind when you expose yourself to poetry on a daily basis. So there's that one. Okay, next one I love this poetry anthology. It's a nature poem for every day of the year. I think I bought this either last year or the year before when it came out. I can't completely remember. I admit I was partly attracted by the really stunning cover. This is a really beautiful book, as you can see. But it's also a fabulous collection of poems. There's some really nice illustrations on the inside as well. Again, this does just share the poems. There's not sort of more about the poetry, but the selection is really, really nice, and they're all inspired by nature, which I'm such a big fan of nature writing that of course I was going to love this anthology, and it's just such a well-chosen selection. Today's one would be The Snowdrop by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and I think that that is a lovely choice. Snowdrops at this time of year, of course. But yes, so I really, really love this poetry anthology. And then quite recently, another similar one was brought out. You can see the design is the same. They're both published by Batsford, these poetry anthologies. This one is Friends, a poem for every day of the year. So this is a collection of poems about friendship. A lot of them to me overlap into love poems as well, which I guess is appropriate because best friends can become lovers and lovers can be best friends. So the fact that there is that overlap between poems about friendship and poems about romantic love too is, I think, still quite appropriate. It still works, and of course that means they can include a much wider selection of poems. I like the design in this one. The printing ink is blue and the pages are this lovely creamy colour, which I really like. And let's see what poem we have for today. Daily Thoughts by Charles Kingsley. Again, quite bite-sized poems that you can enjoy in a really small space of time, but will sort of hopefully brighten up your day a little bit. That's what I find when I read poetry anyway. It always makes me think about something a little bit differently. Okay, so next there's a poem for every day of the year. There's a companion volume to this, which I also have, and it's a poem for every night of the year. These were both marketed, I think, as a bit more for children as well, or teenagers at least, to sort of inspire younger people to enjoy poetry, but they're absolutely appropriate for adults as well. And I mean, I think the majority of poems are definitely more sort of just classic poems. They're not children's poems or anything, and they're really nicely done. Again, with these, there's a little bit of information about either the poem or the poet alongside the poem that they've chosen for that day. So I do really like that. And this one, January 26th, is Ballad of the Totems by Cass Walker. It's a longer one. I'm looking forward to reading that. That sounds interesting. And let's check the night one. Waltzing Matilda by Banjo Patterson. So you can see how you can just get such a wide range of inspiration even from reading some poetry books each day. In the same series, this isn't strictly poetry because it's Shakespeare for every day of the year, but of course lots of Shakespearean sonnets are included, as well as extracts from his play, which are always so poetic. So I think this is still very much worth including in this video. I would definitely like to read more Shakespeare again. I don't think I've read much Shakespeare at all since high school, and I recently read a book called 3 Hours by Rosamund Lupton, which I so enjoyed. It's a thriller, but actually she uses she references Shakespeare a lot within the book, particularly Macbeth, and reading that actually made me want to read Shakespeare again. But this, I think, will be a really nice, easy introduction to doing that, is to read a little bit of Shakespeare every day by reading this anthology. Let me look at today's date. It's a scene from A Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 5, Scene 1. I love A Midsummer Night's Dream. And as you can see, there's a little bit of information about each extract included, which I really like. Okay, then finally, I thought I would share with you some poetry anthologies that are specifically for children but can be very much enjoyed by adults. If you're a teacher, I think these would be wonderful books to have in your classroom if you're a primary school teacher, or if you have if you need to buy presents for any children coming up, then I would really, really recommend these. So the first one is I Am the Seed that Grew the Tree, and it's a nature poem for every day of the year, which I love. I love nature poetry, but these are really designed for children. So you can see a lot of the poems are quite short. They're sort of simple, easy to understand poems, but would still be really great for improving a young child's vocabulary, for getting them used to language and the sound of poetry, and the form of poetry. It's also beautifully illustrated, so it will really captivate young minds, which I love. I love these illustrations. Let's look at today's date. So today's one is The Star, an extract from the poem by Jane Taylor. I love that, such a sort of wintry night scene. Yes, so this one I think is beautiful. I love it. And then this one isn't technically a poem for every day of the year. It is called A Year of Nature Poems, but it's actually just a poem for each month of the year. But I still thought I would include it because, I mean, look how beautiful the illustrations are all through it. This is also just poems by one poet, by the author of this book. But I think it's still worth including because they're just, it's really beautifully illustrated. I think young children would really enjoy this as well. It would also make a really nice gift for any youngsters that you know. But anyway, those are all of my poetry anthologies. Oh my goodness, we've got such a stack in front of me now that you're seeing it in the screen. Yes, so those are all of my poetry anthologies that offer poems for every day of the year. I do have other poetry anthologies that don't do that, and I'm sure I'll share those at some point because, yes, like I said, I adore poetry. I'm always happy to share my love of poetry, but I'd also love to hear from you. Do you like poetry? Do you read a poem a day? Is that something you'd be interested in doing? Do you have any other creative habits or rituals that you perform on a daily basis? I'd really like to know. And if you have any recommendations for me for poetry anthologies, then I'd really love to hear them. I'll link all of the books that I mentioned in the description box down below so that you can check them out. But thanks so much for watching. Do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you enjoy it. And I'll see you soon for the next video. Bye!